starting with Facebook, I was laughing my head off when, to quote the big Zuck on a conference call, he said to his employees, realistically, there are a bunch of people at the company who shouldn't be here. And part of my hope by raising expectations and having more aggressive goals and just kind of turning up the heat a little bit is that I think some of you might just say that this place isn't for you and that self-selection is okay with me. And in today's world, that to me feels very almost old school in its execution. You can imagine an old school CEO saying that, in most companies, maybe 20, 30 years ago. But in this day and age, that's sort of headlining stuff that sort of pops up out of nowhere. And regardless of what you think of how that comes across, it does kind of point to, I don't know, like, why did he feel the need to say that? Is Facebook in a good place in relation to that? What is he doing if all these people that aren't meant to be there, why are they there in the first place if they're really onto, running a good ship? It's very curious.
Oh, it is curious. I mean, I guess really to sort of understand this, we'd need to know what sort of benefits that a current Meta employee enjoys. Maybe it's something to do with the post-COVID world and a lot of people at Meta are just enjoying themselves or don't appear to be as productive as they could, and I'm sure they keep tabs on that. Maybe they're not posting enough likes. Who knows? But the other side of this is that really surely that's just a bit of code for cost cutting. And by raising the bar, which seems strange to me, is he asking all of his employees to innovate or just work harder, and work harder doing what? There's not a lot in there to really decipher from that. But to me, it sort of foreshadows cost cutting, and they're probably going to aim at some of the softer parts of the business.
I also just think from a PR perspective, it kind of plays to that general image of Mark not being the warmest or fuzziest of CEOs around the place. Now, having said that, plenty of tech CEOs and probably just CEOs in general aren't necessarily that anyway, but others are probably a bit smarter in the way they might choose to make themselves look, given that this was a public forum and there was going to be understandable backlash that eventually ended up in the media and was obviously reported. So whether or not he thinks about those things or maybe he just doesn't care, I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because he's got he should have a very highly paid public relations team around him, which I'm sure he does, but by the same token, there would have been a reason for that message, which they would have justified within the team. I mean, maybe it's a message to shareholders that, is deliberately channeled through the company first to show that Zuck's in charge and he's doing his best to make that bottom line as, cheery as possible at the next report. I guess there's many reasons for that, but you're right. I think more generally it just sort of plays into that Zuck stereotype of somebody who just does things his way, and if you don't like it or that you don't even have to understand it, too bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, he is in a position where he's the major shareholder, and despite move after move to move motions at shareholder meetings to either reduce that or to put someone else in, he's got the voting stock to say no every time. So and just keep himself there. One other thing, just while we're on Facebook, and it was in the same call, from what I understand, is him telling employees that Meta would be competing directly with Apple when it comes to creating AR and VR platforms, which I thought was interesting. Apple in particular, because Apple have been, yes, they're slow in their release of updates to technology, and that's one of the frustrations that a lot of people have with Apple, is that, or one of the jokes maybe, that, the iPhone 14 is going to get an always-on display. Yeah, Android's had that for 10 years or something like that, and that's the kind of running gag. And when it comes to AR and VR, they've talked a lot about how interested they are in developing it, but they actually haven't released much to really sort of make a statement as to in terms of what they're doing. Aside from, there's a LiDAR scanner in the phone, and if you open the IKEA app, you can see furniture in your house, before you buy it, which is a nice little gimmick and a nice little feature, but it's not like a regular thing. Whereas, the big Zuck has obviously already done this big play and made this big announcement about the metaverse and creating this whole ecosystem for you to live in, which is a very different type of thing. I just don't see. I just wonder where the crossover is, where he's thinking with that, because to me, Apple might go into that space, but I don't think it's going to be coming anywhere near from the same direction than that what he's already publicly advertised that Meta's going to go in. If anything, I would think the AR component where they augment, your experience with the devices that you're buying from them is kind of where they're going, and slowly building to it, as opposed to here's a massive ecosystem that you can live in. And that's the kind of interesting thing to me about that comparison and why he would think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where, there's probably the weakness for Meta is that they're a software company. There's no hardware, and they will rely on the hardware that's in Apple, in Google, in Microsoft products, I guess, to actually facilitate whatever, Meta experience they think that they're going to create. But the reality is that I'm sure Apple was and probably Google have already got a whole lot of Meta or AR or VR experiences in the labs, probably ready to roll out when it's not so gimmicky, when there's the rest of the world catches up. Neither Google nor Apple need to lead with a product that's not going to do particularly well because the demand isn't there, or it's not that well supported by business in terms of an advertising channel. So they're probably just sitting on it, and because of that, Zuck's probably frustrated. He's trying to put in specific and unique meta features into these products, but by the same token, Apple and Google can probably just put them straight into their hardware.
I think just one final thing before we move off Facebook is just wondering where Facebook is and where Meta is and where they will be going forward, because it's starting to become a bit murky. Facebook was the $1 billion idea as popularized by the social network. It was the once in a generation idea. And yes, he did well. He set that up well. But is all of this just reaching? Is it all just trying to grab for the next thing when he actually doesn't have another thing in the bag to pull out? Is Facebook his only real thing going forward? The other tech companies have diversified in many ways. Even Google, who 90% of their business is still search and ads, propping up the entire company, still make attempts, with technology to do some other things and have some, minor successes as well elsewhere. But I do wonder what the future of Facebook and Meta is, and is there a possibility that it might not be relevant at some point in the future?
I think there's every possibility for purely digital technologies not to be relevant in the future. I mean, the only hardware that I think Meta has would be the Oculus products. I don't really know, but they don't really have any other hardware, so they're purely a digital entity. And you're going to have to run that digital entity on somebody else's hardware until, I guess, we just put chips straight in our brain. So and that'll be someone's hardware as well. So I don't know. We live in a strange world where a company 15 years old may be coming to the end of its life. Whereas in the past it might take a 3 or 4 generations, 60 to 80 years for something to become obsolete. In the modern age, I guess that could be 20 years. So I'm sure they're working on it at Meta. I'm not for a moment predicting their demise or anything like that, but it just shows you the pressure that even companies on top of their game in the modern age, tech companies, they're always facing threats of something new.